Hello, and the biggest of welcomes to This Woman's Work, a space where you can hear and read about some amazing women, the fantastic jobs they do, and the paths that have led them to where they are today. I'm here today with Meg. Hi, Meg.
Good afternoon.
Good morning.
Good morning.
What time is it?
Good afternoon.
Could you tell the lovely listener what it is you do for a living?
So, at the moment, I am working as a paper flower maker.
Which is brilliant. All around you, I can see. Actually, no, they're the ones I've bought you, aren't they? There.
Those are real.
They're the real
rest
ones.
Are all paper.
Amazing.
Yes, I make paper flowers and I teach people how to make paper flowers through workshops.
Brilliant. No idea how you got to this, so let's find out. But we're going to start with little Meg.
Okay.
What were you like? What were you into when you were teeny tiny?
What was I into? Well, I was into probably grubbling around outside with various pets.
Brilliant.
So I grew up just outside Norwich, and when I was very young, we moved. My parents bought a huge house, which was way too big for the three of us because it was just me at that point. And we started to renovate one end of the house, and then a few years later, my mum's sister moved in with her husband. And alternately, my mum and my aunt had girls. So I grew up in a house with 10 people.
Wow.
So there were three daughters on my side. My mum had 3 girls, and then my aunt and uncle had 3 girls. So my poor dad and my uncle grew up, were basically living in a house of women. And conversations
Had they bought the house for your, knowing that your sister would move in?
I don't know originally, but it just became very obvious. So they had their end of the house and we had our end of the house. And so there were always lots of kids around to play with, and from quite a young age. I'm the oldest by 4 years, I think. But as soon as the others started to kind of get old enough, I had playmates. So we were very self-contained.
Wow.
And we lived at the end of a half-a-mile drive, and we had pigs and guinea pigs and chickens. So there was a lot of that playing outside.
This feels like a wholly separate podcast. Doesn't it? Like whatever that life was, or at least a documentary. Wow.
It was quite a unique childhood. And I was very creative from an early age, so I have lots of memories of painting and drawing and
being outside.
And being outside, yeah.
Wow.
And just having lots of animals around, and it was a really happy childhood. I was very carefree, and I had a best friend from quite an early age, and she just became part of the family as well.
Well, why not?
Yeah, so there were just lots of girls around, and all the pets seemed to be girls as well.
Did they? Oh, how funny!
We even had a pet pig that lived in the house. So we had a Vietnamese potbelly pig that used to just be in the house.
Oh my gosh, this just sounds brilliant.
Definitely wasn't normal.
But it was to you.
Yeah, it was to me.
So what was school like then? What happened when you were then at school?
What happened at school? I suppose being a little bit older, I kind of had my best friends at school as opposed to my sisters and cousins who were very close in age. So they were quite a little posse. And then my best friend Katie and I were really close, and we hung out a lot. And I don't remember school being okay. I went to a private girls' school, which it was mixed. Yeah, I was fine at school. I didn't have a problem at school. I was very sporty.
Yeah.
So
then you're always going to be fine there, aren't you? Because you kind of find that tribe, don't you?
Yeah, the sport was good. It was quite a small school, but I never knew what I was going to do. I think I was a bit lost in direction. I knew I wanted to do something creative, but I didn't know in what aspect or what department. And
can I ask, what were your parents doing?
My dad was, he was like the 2IC to Colin Chapman at Team Lotus. So he was away a lot. So he was away with the Grand Prix.
Yes.
And so
that's not massively creative, but that is
it's not creative at all.
It's quite hardcore.
My mum always really enjoyed art. My grandmother was very creative and a very good painter. My mum was a stay-at-home mum.
But when we were younger, did they advise creative people? I don't think they advised creative people to do anything, did they? It was kind of like, it's still the usual routes, and you're there going, I don't want to go and be a
it was
teacher
difficult
or
to...
a doctor or a policeman.
Yeah,
or...
nothing of that. I suppose actually my best friend and I, we both talked about being surgeons. I think that was our fascination at one point. And we were into all the sort of gory operations and things like that. I don't think either of us had the brain for it, but she went off and did nursing actually. And yeah, I floundered for a bit after school. I did my A-levels, which I did fine in. Again, I did art, geography and biology, I think.
Oh gosh, that is a mix.
A complete mixture. And I got a place to do geography, actually, because I was really interested in volcanoes. Physical geography was the other direction I could have gone in, I guess. But I didn't. I did an art foundation course, and I think through that year I had such fun doing that and was just enjoyed being creative that I just, I actually went off to Bristol and did graphic design.
Wow.
But it was a really pivotal time because it was right when computers were coming in. So I was almost the last year that they were teaching old-fashioned graphic design. So our tutor, I remember him right at the beginning, he held up an A4, not an A4, he held up an HB pencil and he went, "This is your most important tool." And he said, "We've got 3 computers, but you teach yourself, I won't teach you."
Gosh, how funny.
And so, not being computer savvy, I just went, I'll stick to the pencil. So I did no graphic design at all. It was all just craft, physical. And
but cool though. Still.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I did a lot of photography. I dabbled in photography. And then over a very drunk lunch with a university friend, she told me that she wasn't going to come back and finish her degree. She was going to work in London, and she talked me into not going back to university. And it was...
How far into it were you?
I'd done 2 years.
Oh, so you'd done a lot then.
So I'd done 2.
Yeah.
And I thought, yeah, great, let's go and live in London. And then she let me down very badly and went and lived with someone else.
Oh.
And so I kind of, again, floundered.
But you were in London at this point?
Well, I'd come back to Norwich.
Okay, well, that's good,
and then, the London thing just didn't sort of... It was too
still
scary.
dropped out.
I didn't have a job or anything, I didn't have anything to go to. It was a drunk lunch idea. But I'd stopped uni. Anyway, so I worked in Norwich for a bit, and then I went travelling again.
Yeah.
And I did a working holiday year.
Yep.
And went to Australia and met my husband in Australia.
Okay.
And and sort of travelled around a bit, and then I came back here, and I actually came back and dragged him over here, and I went back and finished my 3rd year. So I went back to university, and I finished, which was good. So I did get my degree, and I got a good degree, but mostly I just spent the 3rd year in the photography studio so that was kind of, again, no direction, just going with the wind and seeing what was fun and what I liked, and so... Okay,
and then what then? So you've got your degree...
So I've got my degree, and then lived in, my Australian boyfriend moved to England, and we...
So did you stay in Bristol, or did you come back?
No, we moved to London.
Okay.
So we moved to London, and he got a job, and I got a job with a photographer.
Okay.
So I worked as his producer, basically. He was quite a well-known advertising photographer, and I helped him in his studio and... helped him organise shoots and negotiate deals. And
how did you get that? You just applied for it and then...
Goodness me, I can't remember.
I guess your photography knowledge... Sorry, I'm doing your rug. But I guess your photography knowledge must have really come into play.
Yeah, and I was a good organiser. I enjoyed organising things. Did you rock up
looking really cool
I probably rocked up and just said, "You don't know me, but I really want to come and work for you."
Yeah.
Which is usually how I get a job.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever got a job through the
usual way.
Yeah, the usual way. So I'd done a bit of working as a photographer's assistant through uni, and so I was working with this photographer, and then I left there, and I worked for a producer, and she was terrifying. I was really
Ooh.
scared of her. She was an absolute ball breaker.
Was she?
And that all went a bit wrong. I got a bit bullied there. So again, I left. And then Dave and he said, I don't want to stay living in London. We'll go back to Australia. So we did. We went back to Australia.
Wow.
And somewhere in there, I've forgotten that we got married, which we did.
Got married,
Can't remember
moved
how.
to Australia.
Yeah, got married, moved to Australia.
In fairness, marriage, moving to this side of the world, they're both big things.
I'm getting my timeline a bit mixed up there. We were definitely married, and we lived in London for 2 years, and then we went back to Australia. In fact, weirdly enough, 2 years to the day. So the day we moved to London, 2 years later, we moved to Australia.
Wow, and whereabouts in Australia?
To Sydney.
Yeah.
So that was where he was from. And it was fantastic. I loved it. It was very, it's an amazing place to live. Very outdoorsy, beautiful weather, of course. Yeah. Real outdoor lifestyle. It was good. I mean, I like I said before, I had a very close family, so I did miss family. But I was young. I didn't have kids myself, so I was just like, let's go and see
did you go and do a similar thing in Sydney then?
I had real tricky work in Sydney. Was really tricky because in London the photography industry is really big. So a lot of agencies and a lot of photographers and a lot of just a lot of people, I think. And in Sydney the whole industry was much smaller. So rather than working for one photographer, they had production agencies. Yes. So you'd have an agency with 5 or 6 people, and then they would have a lot of photographers and stylists and various other creatives on their books who they represented. So I got in with a really good agency run by 2 women, one who was absolutely lovely and I got on really well with, and one who just energetically we didn't click. Yeah. And I was there for a couple of years.
You're saying that now though, aren't you? But back then you would never have described it as that, would you? You'd just be like, no. I'd just be like, I don't feel comfortable around her. Yes, yeah. Whereas now you just know it, yeah.
And it wasn't until years later I realised actually when I was talking to somebody about it that she bullied me. And that really set me on a very difficult path. And then I had lots of my own photographs. Like I was still taking photographs for pleasure. Yeah. And I had a lot of my own photographs. And so I found I wanted to get them framed because framing was so expensive. So I found a framer and I said, I've got lots of things I want to frame. Will you teach me how to do it? Can I come and volunteer? And he said, all right, well, bring some of your stuff to frame and I'll teach you.
Wow, brilliant.
So I volunteered and I framed something incredibly complicated, which is actually on the wall out there. Wow. And he said, all right, well, you can obviously do this. I'll give you a job. So I became a picture framer.
But
completely randomly.
Yeah. But lovelyly accidentally.
Accidentally, yeah, it was good. And that was great. And then we had our first child, Archie, who is now 19. So then child number 2 came along. Yeah. And, he was, bless him, he was hard work. He was very squashed in my tummy because he was a 10-pounder and I'm tiny.
You are tiny. So oh my God, I want to hug you just for that.
He came out very uncomfortable and spent
Tell me he at least came out the sunroof.
He came out naturally.
Oh no.
He came out naturally, yeah. And yes, this midwife walked in and she looked at him and she looked at me and she looked at him and she went, you never just gave birth naturally to that. Yeah. And I was like, yes, I did. So I worked part-time. We used childcare and Dave's parents were around a little bit. They did a bit of childcare. But they didn't particularly do an awful lot. So I was very reliant on, paid childcare. Yeah. So some days in the holidays, I'd have to pay for the kids to be in daycare. And I'd go to work, and it would actually cost me to go to work. I know. So I'd come home less than I would have had if they'd just been at home. But I needed to keep the job. So
yeah, and also it's something for you though, isn't it? And it's about that kind
escaping.
Yeah.
So I had. So what was I doing then? Then I was back and sort of between various jobs, and then I ended up at a picture framers that was fantastic, and it was a big warehouse with lots of art for sale, lots of quirky bits and pieces. The woman who ran it was quite left of centre. She used to she had a bottle of tequila she used to keep down by the fridge, and
brilliant.
She'd come in the morning and have a swig of tequila to get her going. And I won't go into details of other things she got up to.
I love her already.
She was quite wild.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I enjoyed doing when I was much younger, probably when I was a teenager, was paper cutting. So using a scalpel instead, to do drawing, detailed drawing. And I'd made this little book and completely forgotten about it and hadn't paper cut for years.
Yeah.
And I pulled it out, and it was like a gift. Someone said, "You made this and you can still do this."
Wow.
And so I kind of suddenly went, I'd forgot, and I hadn't remembered even that I could do it. I suppose mummy brain and the fog of childhood. And so I got this book out and just started paper cutting in the evenings, and did loads of designs and
what, almost sort of art at this sort of art.
It was art. So pictures out of cut paper and shadows. When you paper cut, it's almost what's not there. Oh no, hang on a second, I've forgotten a really important event. In 2007, my youngest sister was killed in an accident in London. So she was 26 and she got run over by a truck. It was a total accident. It wasn't the guy's fault. It was just one of those horrible London junctions so that was absolutely devastating. And I was in Australia, and that was before Angus was born. So it was a year before Angus was born. And I'd got Archie, who was very little. He was only 2.5, 3, and we got the call in the morning, and then got on a flight, came back to England, and I think that was a real turning point for me, because it made me realise that one really had to live in the moment. And just stop worrying about the future. Just enjoy the here and now. And so I quite often used to really notice, if I was having a nice time, I used to think, would I want to be anywhere else right now? No, I'm very happy where I am right now.
Oh, brilliant.
I would really enjoy, if it was just going for a walk.
Be in the moment or
sitting in a park or whatever it was, out with friends or whatever. So that was a real lesson that, I had to lose a sister to learn that lesson, but it was a good lesson to learn.
I know you have a little life in you yet. I know you have a lot of strength left. I know you have a little life.
So that was one thing that kind of, again, came into play later on when now more sort of relevant to what I'm doing now. So then one evening in 2017, Dave, we were sitting after dinner, the kids I think had gone to bed or somewhere else, and he just said, "Life's a little bit dull, isn't it? It's a bit boring. I feel like something needs to happen." And I think we were just in a sort of, a bit of a routine.
Which is what everyone does,
Which is what everyone does.
Yeah, with your kids and everything.
And a week later, my mum rang up and told me she had brain cancer. And so life then got completely derailed. Gosh. And it was kind of the start of the end of the marriage and life taking a whole different turn.
Yes,
and a really rough few years.
With your mum particularly, or...?
No, well, what it triggered. She lived 4 months after that.
I was going to say, because...
It was very quick.
Yeah, yes.
And her experience that we experienced of her dying was, it was amazing. It was very gentle. It was she was at home. She stayed at home the whole time. It was a really positive experience of death. And she wasn't in pain, and I was able to come back from Australia several times, and I was there. My sister brilliantly managed to get me home from Australia just before she died.
Okay.
So I was there at the end. And again, that was a real kind of, wow, I don't have mum anymore.
Yeah.
There's no backstop. My dad's still alive and we're very close, but when you lose one half of a parent, it's quite
and also
we don't live forever.
Because let's face it, mums.
And she was one of my best friends. We talked all the time, and she was so supportive and so encouraging, and she always wanted me to do something creative. She keeps to say, "Maggie, I wish you could make money out of your art. You're so good."
Yeah.
And Dave and I had been talking about moving to England because we'd now got my mum's house.
Yes, yeah.
And we had such a huge mortgage in Sydney, we could now live here.
It's expensive to live in Sydney, isn't it?
It's a really expensive city. It's one of the most expensive cities in the world.
It is, yeah.
And because we then could live here mortgage free, we sort of said, well, why don't we try moving to England for a bit, give the boys a bit of their English heritage.
And how old were they at this stage then?
Oh, I think maybe 9 and 12, something like that. 10 and 13.
Yeah.
I think Archie turned 13 just after we moved here.
Yeah, wow.
So we're still quite young.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we then went back to Sydney and sold up and moved back here.
What, within sort of 6 months or something?
How long did it all take? It probably was about 6 to 8 months. So the marriage then broke up just post COVID, and Dave went back to Australia. Just wanted to be back in Australia. Couldn't
settle.
Couldn't see it working here. He was miserable. He was very homesick, very depressed, and it wasn't good. So he went back to Australia, and I stayed with the boys. What was I doing then? I was just kind of in coping mechanism, really. I wasn't, because of post-COVID, I wasn't really working much.
Yeah.
I was trying to work out what to do. I had a bit of money behind me because of Mum, inheriting a bit from Mum.
Yeah.
So there was a really really messy, sad, difficult.
Well, and also coming off the back of COVID, which, let's face it, was just such a horrid time for everybody.
And then on Instagram, I got a post come up with these pictures of these paper flowers, and it caught my eye, and I delved in and I went, ooh, that looks interesting. And I followed the woman. She's called Tiffany Turner. She lives in America. She's much more of an artist, so her flowers are quite out there. They're incredible, and she's got a book, The Fine Art of Paper Flowers. So I bought the book.
Yes.
Kitted myself out with some crepe paper, and I just went, oh my God, I am in heaven.
Yeah.
This is my stuff.
Yeah.
And I just started making every flower that I could, and loved it, and used the garden to find flowers and work out how to make them. I bought more books. I scoured the internet. I followed everybody I could on Instagram.
Just you hanging out at your local florists, I'm guessing, and just seeing what's seasonal,
what's around. And I mean, the garden obviously is full of flowers, so I just used the garden. And I started a little art group with 3 friends and said, let's meet up once a month, and we're all quite creative, and we'll bring our own stuff, and we'll just use my house, and we'll just, use the kitchen table and we'll just have an evening of being creative. Yeah. And so they all came, and they bought whatever they were going to do, a couple of painters, and I was making snowdrops, paper snowdrops, and they all went, oh, can we do that? Will you show us how to do that? So I showed them how to make snowdrops, and at the end of it, one of the girls, Jo, she just said, you should be teaching this. I want to come back and do another one. Can we, can we do more? And so I thought, oh, God, I hadn't even thought of that. Hadn't considered it. And so I emailed 15 friends. I chose 15 people who I thought would sort of be able to, enjoy it. And I said, would you be interested in coming to a workshop? This is a trial. I will be hammering you with questions, giving you a questionnaire, and I charged them all a minimum amount. And they all said yes. So I thought,
did you provide alcohol?
I think we had wine, yes.
Yeah, I was going to say. Tell me there was alcohol. Tequila, bringing this story on the way back.
I think we probably had a couple of bottles of wine.
Yeah, brilliant.
So I had to divide it into 2 workshops because they all said yes. So I did two groups of 7 and 8.
Wow.
And they all just went, this is great. Yeah. Yes, do it. And it's just taken off. And it was one of those things where I think it was John Lennon who was quoted, life's what happens to you when you're busy making other plans.
I know, so true.
Could never have picked it. Would never have guessed.
Yeah.
That and I wish my mum was around because I could hear her going, you've finally done it. You're making money out of something creative. I knew you could do it.
Yeah. So as well as obviously the teaching and the workshops, so how can people, obviously, because we've got to tell this on the podcast, so how can they buy and consume your work?
So the main area of the business is teaching through workshops. Okay. So I do workshops here at home, and I do them in various venues around Norfolk and Suffolk.
Yeah.
Quite often I'll get, usually somewhere that's like a cafe that's associated with a beautiful garden will ring up and say, we've just started thinking about putting workshops on, would you be interested? Of course, when it's with a garden, it's lovely, because then people can go and have a look at the flowers.
Yeah.
And there's always tea and cake or wine and cheese.
Amazing. I'll take all.
Take it all.
All of it.
So you can have tea and cake and wine and cheese. I don't make an awful lot to sell, just because the time it takes to make the individual flowers means that it's very time consuming, and therefore they'd be really expensive.
But do you take commissions though?
So I do take commissions.
Yeah.
I've just sent a whole box full of stuff off to London, because the workshops, they're not easy. People actually have to really kind of work at it. Some people find it quite difficult, and I'm always there to help. It's not everybody goes home with a beautiful flower, but I think because you're focusing on something and you're actually creating something that you can then be proud of at the end, you actually don't think about anything else except what you're doing in that moment. And so I think if you come from a really stressful day, people sit down and they're kind of like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. And you give them a piece of crepe paper and they stretch out the crepe paper, and you can see, and they just kind of go, oh. And that is literally what they do. They have a piece of crepe paper and they stretch it out, and they literally go, oh. You're like
a stress toy.
It is like a stress toy. And they're like, can I have another piece just to stretch, please?
And you got a whole other sideline going on there.
Yeah, here you go. A handout. I always think it would be really good for sort of hyper kids in a class. You just give them crepe paper to stretch out.
Because you can't stretch it too long. It does have a break point, isn't it?
It will break at some point. But and there's the magic. It's what I call the magic moment, is when you've got all the pieces of your flower, and we've gone through and I've shown them how to cut and shape, and we've created the centre of the flower, and then you start to stick the petals on. And I have this, if only I could bottle this moment. I had this one lady, and we were making daffodils back in, must have been February or March, and she stuck the petals of her daffodil on, and she just held it in front of her. She looked at it and she fell in love with it. And she just, in absolute awe, she just went, I've just made a daffodil.
Yeah, I can't believe I've just done that.
I can't believe I've just done that.
Okay, so what is next?
What is next? Well, growing like the flowers in the garden.
Yeah.
I've got lots of ideas bubbling away. I've got plans to just expand, I guess. There's potential for more workshops. I've done a few hen parties now, and word of mouth, obviously.
Baby showers, all sorts of things.
Yes. I'd like to do, I'd really love to do some really special commissions.
I was going to say.
Which would really be beautiful to do. When the renovation's done, I think the idea of being able to use the house and the garden, one of the ideas is to turn the garage into an Airbnb.
Yeah,
I would love to do a residential retreat. Yes. I'd love to do a 2 or 3 day workshop where people come and they make flowers, and we go and visit beautiful gardens.
Oh my God!
So there's lots of ideas.
With wine.
With wine, always with wine, and maybe tequila as well in the evenings.
I'm in.
In honour of Melissa, who I used to work with in Sydney.
Yes.
Where do you stop? There's so many ideas.
You really are on the start of this, aren't you?
I feel there's a kind of excitement bubbling. I feel like I just know it's going to work.
Yeah.
And I just know that I love it. I know that I'm passionate about it. I know
what it brings out in other people.
I know what it brings out in other people.
Yeah.
And I know that I have created for myself the best job that I could ever have imagined doing, and yet I never imagined what it would be. But I'm ticking the boxes going, yes, it does that, and yes, I love it, and yes, it ticks that box.
Yeah.
And so I feel really excited about where it's going to go.
Well, I'm excited for you.
We'll see. Watch this space.
Yeah. Well, people literally can watch the space. Right. So my 3 final questions then. are, what advice would you give your younger self? So it could be any version of your younger self. Could be, you know, in your house full of women, which already I love, and I wish I'd lived there as well.
With all the animals and the house pig.
Or it could have been you moving to, it could be any version of your younger self that you think needed some advice.
Believe in yourself. Don't let the words of others define who you become.
Yeah.
Don't let people who don't think you can do it, don't believe in them, because if you really know that you can do something
and you feel it,
there's no reason why you can't.
No. Okay, then what advice do you think your older self, maybe 20 years in the future, 25, it could be any, but
what advice?
Old Meg, what do you think she would say to you now?
You mean older than I am now?
No, we're talking about, well, it could be any, but what do you think she'd say to you now?
Make sure you give yourself time to relax and actually get away from the business.
Yeah.
Make sure you don't close down everything else sort of accidentally because you love what you're doing.
Yes.
Don't let your friendship groups and things drop away because you feel like you've got to do it all, you've got to get on top of it, you've got to, you know...
But you're at the start of it, it's so tempting, isn't it?
It is tempting, and I find that I spend days at home, actually in this room, making flowers, and then I kind of...
come out.
I haven't been out for days, my goodness.
Okay, then my final question is always just life advice, just to throw out there to anyone listening. Could be a man, a woman... You know, is there a mantra that you live by or a saying that really resonates with you?
Gosh. Again, I think my sister's death really, for me, was probably one of my biggest life lessons is to live in the moment. Don't sweat about things you have no control about in the future. You can guide your future and you can set intentions for your future, but ultimately we have no control over what's going to happen. If you're out on your bike and a truck's going to come and run you over, you can't control that.
Yeah.
And if you spend your time worrying about whether you're going to have enough money or whether you're going to have your health or all that kind of thing, you just don't know.
Yeah.
So live now, enjoy now, notice the world around you, the people around you, hug the people you love, tell the people you love that you love them.
Brilliant.
Bit cliche, but I think it's quite good advice.
Yeah. On that, I would say thank you very much, Meg.
Thank you.
If you would like to hear more about this chat, see some pics and read about how to get started in this industry and or this role, then please go to our website www.thiswomanswork.org. The link is on this podcast page and across our socials. Sincere thanks.